You ever wake up to something hanging over your property that absolutely shouldn't exist? That was the first thought that hit me at exactly 7:12 a.m., right before the sound of a power drill tore through the quiet like it owned the place. Not construction noise in the distance. Not some neighbor fixing a fence. This was close. Too close. I stepped out onto my back patio, coffee still warm in my hand, and froze mid-step. There was a shadow where sunlight used to be. A hard, rectangular shadow stretching across my yard like it had been dropped there overnight. I looked up, squinting against the glare, and that's when I saw it. A brand new balcony. Not on my house. Not even close. It was jutting out from Patricia Collins' second story next door, extending past her fence line and hovering directly over my property. For a second, my brain tried to rationalize it. Maybe it just looked closer than it was. Maybe the angle was messing with me. But then a speck of sawdust drifted down and landed on my patio table. I took a slow step forward, feeling that crunch of gravel under my boots, and tilted my head just enough to line it up with the fence. No mistake. That thing was over my yard. By at least 3 feet. The drill kicked back on, a high-pitched whine, followed by the dull thud of something heavy being set into place. I could smell fresh-cut lumber in the air, sharp and clean, mixed with the faint chemical bite of treated wood. It didn't belong here. None of it did. This backyard wasn't just empty space to me. I'd spent the last 8 months rebuilding it for my mom after her chemo treatments finally ended. Every inch of that grass had been reseeded by hand. The raised garden beds along the fence. Built on weekends, one board at a time. Tomatoes, basil, a couple stubborn pepper plants that refused to give up even in the Texas heat. And sunlight, that was the whole point. Doctor said she needed it. Said routine, fresh air, and a place to sit in the morning light would do more than half the medications she was on. And now there it was. A balcony casting a shadow right over the exact spot where her chair sat every morning at 8 o'clock sharp. I set my coffee down slowly, the ceramic clicking against the table louder than it should have, and walked toward the fence. The workers barely glanced at me. One guy in a neon vest just kept drilling like I didn't exist. Another adjusted a support beam that clearly extended past the property line. No hesitation. No question. Like it had already been approved somewhere I hadn't been invited to. That's when I heard her voice. Smooth. Sweet. Just enough to sound polite if you didn't know better. Oh good. You're up early. Patricia called from above, leaning casually against the railing like she was showing off a new patio set instead of building into my air. White blouse. Perfect hair. Coffee mug in hand like this was just another calm, suburban morning. They'll be done by noon. It'll really improve the view back here. I didn't answer right away. I just looked up at her, then back at the beam crossing over my yard, then back at the shadow creeping across my garden beds inch by inch as the sun climbed. My jaw tightened, but I kept my voice level. That's over my property line. She smiled. Not confused. Not surprised. Just amused. It's just airspace, she said, taking a slow sip like she'd already settled the argument in her head. You don't own the sky, Ethan. For a second, everything went quiet. The drill stopped. The wind shifted. Even the birds seemed to pause. And I remember thinking, she might actually believe that. That this invisible line above my yard didn't count. That if it wasn't touching the ground, it wasn't mine. I nodded once. Not agreeing. Just processing. Because I'd heard that tone before. The kind people use when they're absolutely sure they're right. Right up until the moment they aren't. I turned back toward my house without another word. Already replaying the last few months in my head. Property survey. Closing documents. The old county records I'd skimmed and never thought I'd need. And somewhere in the back of my mind, something clicked into place. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I just walked inside, grabbed my file cabinet key, and told myself one simple thing. Don't fight this loud. Fight it right. I did not go back outside right away. That would have turned it into an argument, and arguments were exactly what people like Patricia thrived on. Instead, I stepped into the cool, quiet of my kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator filling the space where that drill noise had been just seconds ago, and I stood there for a moment letting my eyes adjust, letting my breathing slow down. Then I walked straight to the hallway closet, reached up to the top shelf, and pulled down a black metal file box that still had dust along the edges from when I moved in. The key clicked louder than it should have when I turned it, like the house itself knew something important was about to happen. Inside were the things most homeowners forget about after closing day. Paperwork, surveys, permits. The boring stuff nobody looks at unless something goes wrong. I flipped past the mortgage documents, the insurance binder, the inspection report with all its highlighted notes about minor cracks and aging pipes, until I found the folded sheet I was looking for. The official property survey. Heavy paper, county stamped, clean lines marking out every inch of my lot down to the decimal. I spread it out on the kitchen counter and flattened it with my palm, tracing the boundary lines with my finger like I was reading a map I had not needed until now. 50 feet wide, 120 feet deep. Clean, rectangular, simple. But what mattered was not just the ground. There was a notation along the margin that I had barely paid attention to before. Something about vertical rights. I narrowed my eyes, leaned closer, and read it again, slower this time. Property ownership extends upward subject to reasonable use and local regulation. That line sat there quietly, like it had been waiting for this exact moment. Outside, the drill kicked on again, sharper this time, followed by the hollow knock of someone testing the balcony floor. I could picture it without even looking. More weight, more extension, more shadow creeping across my yard. I reached for my phone and pulled up the photos I had taken the day I closed on the house. Back when everything was clean. Open sky, full sunlight hitting the exact corner where my mom liked to sit. With her coffee every morning. 8 o'clock sharp, same routine every day since she got out of treatment. That routine mattered more than anything Patricia would ever understand. My mom was still asleep in the guest room down the hall. I could hear the soft rhythm of her breathing through the cracked door, steady and calm. The kind of sound you do not take for granted after months of hospital machines and late-night phone calls. The last thing she needed was stress, or conflict, or waking up to construction hanging over her head like it belonged there. I folded the survey carefully, not rushed, not angry, just deliberate, and slid it into a manila folder along with a few blank sheets of paper. Documentation. That was the difference between reacting and responding. I grabbed a tape measure from the drawer, the metal edge cold against my fingers, and headed back toward the patio door. The moment I stepped outside again, the smell of fresh lumber hit me harder than before, like the project had advanced in the few minutes I had been gone. One of the workers was tightening bolts along the support beam, the exact beam that crossed over into my airspace like it had every right to be there. I walked straight to the fence line, extended the tape measure upward, and held it steady against the edge of the balcony. 3 feet and 4 inches past the property line. Not close. Not questionable. Exact. I said, "Hey, can you pause for a second?" The guy looked down, wiped his hands on his jeans, and gave me that neutral look contractors use when they do not want to get involved. "You got a permit for this extension?" I asked, keeping my tone calm. He shrugged. "We build what we are told to build, man. HOA signed off on it." I nodded slowly, letting that sink in. HOA signed off on it. Not the city. Not zoning. Not anyone who actually controlled property law. Just Patricia and whatever authority she thought she had. Above me, I heard the faint clink of ceramic as she set her coffee mug down on the railing again. "Ethan, you are making this more complicated than it needs to be," she said, her voice carrying that same polished calm. "It does not touch your land." I looked up at her, then back at the tape measure still extended in my hand, the numbers clear and undeniable. "No," I said quietly, almost to myself, "but it is already in my space." And that was the moment I stopped seeing this as a neighbor dispute and started seeing it for what it really was. Not noise, not inconvenience, not even disrespect. It was a line being crossed. Literally. And once a line like that gets crossed without consequence, it does not stop at 3 feet. It keeps going. By noon, the sunlight in my backyard was gone. Not completely, but enough to feel wrong. The kind of wrong you do not notice in a single glance, but your body picks up on it anyway. The air felt cooler in patches where it should have been warm, and the shadows did not move the way they used to. I stood by the garden beds, watching how the edge of that balcony cut across the tomatoes my mom had planted just 2 weeks ago. The leaves were already curling slightly, reaching for light that was no longer there. It was subtle, but it was happening. And that was the part that bothered me the most. Not the structure itself. Not even Patricia's attitude. It was the quiet, slow way it was changing something that had taken time to build. Around 1:30, the construction noise stopped. No more drilling. No more hammering. just the occasional creak of wood settling into place. I stepped outside again, this time without the tape measure, without the folder, just to look at it finished. The balcony extended clean and polished from her house. White railings, smooth decking, the kind of thing you would see in a home magazine. If you ignored where it was. Patricia was already out there, leaning against the railing like she had been waiting for that exact moment. "See," she called down, her voice light, almost proud. "It looks great. It really opens up the space." I let out a slow breath and walked closer to the fence, tilting my head back just enough to meet her eyes. "You built over my yard," I said, not loud, not aggressive, just stating it plainly. She gave a small shrug, like we were discussing landscaping choices. "It is a few feet of overhang, Ethan. It does not affect you the way you think it does." I glanced at the shadows stretching across the garden again, then back at her. "It already does." She rested her arms on the railing, fingers loosely wrapped around her coffee mug, completely at ease. "You are focusing on technicalities," she said. "The HOA approved the design. Everything meets community standards." There it was again. That word. Approved. Like it carried more weight than it actually did. I nodded once, letting her finish, letting her feel like she had the upper hand in the conversation. "Community standards do not override property lines," I said. She smiled, but it was thinner this time, less patient. "You are not a lawyer." I almost smiled back, but I kept it to myself. "No," I said, "but I know how to read a survey." For a second, there was a pause. Not long, just enough for the smallest crack to show in her certainty. Then she straightened slightly, adjusting her posture like she was resetting the tone. "If you have concerns, you can bring them to the board," she said. "We have procedures for this." I looked up at the balcony again, then down at the fence line, then back at her. "You are the board." That landed exactly how I expected it to. A brief silence. The kind that does not need to be filled. She took a sip of her coffee, slower this time, buying herself a moment. "Then you can submit it in writing," she replied, "and it will be reviewed." I let out a quiet breath through my nose, not frustrated, not defeated, just done talking. Because I could already see how this was going to play out if I kept it at this level. Back and forth. Opinions. Authority versus logic. And that was not where this needed to be decided. I turned and walked back toward the house without another word, feeling the weight of her eyes on my back, probably interpreting my silence as hesitation. Or worse, acceptance. Inside, the air felt different again. Quieter. Controlled. I set the folder down on the kitchen counter, pulled out a blank sheet of paper, and sat down. Not to complain. Not to argue. To document. Date. Time. Measurements. Exact overhang distance. Description of structure. Impact on property use. Every detail, written clearly, like I was. Building something she could not just talk her way around. Down the hall, I heard my mom's door open slowly, followed by the soft shuffle of her steps. "Ethan," she called, her voice still gentle from sleep. "Is that construction still going on?" I looked toward the hallway, then back at the paper in front of me, the pen still in my hand. "It is finished," I said. There was a small pause. Then she appeared at the edge of the kitchen, wrapped in her light sweater, eyes drifting toward the backyard through the glass door. She stepped closer, her gaze lifting upward, and I watched her expression change. Not dramatic, not shocked, just confused. "Was that always there?" she asked quietly. I shook my head once. "No," I said. And in that moment, seeing her try to understand something that should have never been there in the first place, I felt that shift lock in completely. This was not about being right anymore. It was about making sure something like this did not become normal. That evening, I did something most people skip because it feels like overkill. I walked my own property line slowly, step by step, like I was seeing it for the first time. The sun was lower now, pushing long shadows across the yard, and that balcony above me cut through the light like a hard edge that did not belong. I could hear distant traffic, a lawnmower a few houses down, the normal sounds of a neighborhood settling into evening, but under that was something else. A steady drip. I followed the sound toward the garden beds and saw it. Water. Not a lot. Just a slow, consistent line running off the edge of Patricia's new balcony, dripping straight down into the soil near the tomatoes. The wood above was still fresh, still holding moisture from the afternoon cleaning, and gravity was doing the rest. Drip. Pause. Drip. Each drop darkened the soil in the exact same spot, over and over, like it had already decided this was where it belonged. I crouched down, pressed my fingers lightly into the dirt, and felt the difference. One side dry and warm, the other damp and compacting already. Uneven, uncontrolled. I looked up again, tracing the path from the railing to the edge to the exact point where it crossed over into my yard. It was not just a shadow anymore. It was impact, physical, measurable, and more importantly, it was predictable, which meant it could be documented. I stood up slowly and pulled my phone from my pocket, switching to video instead of photos this time. I recorded the drip, the angle, the distance from the fence, narrating quietly under my breath so I would not forget later. 6:43 p.m., water runoff from structure extending approximately 3 feet 4 inches past boundary, landing directly within garden bed. My voice sounded calmer than I felt, steady, controlled, like I was reading off a checklist instead of documenting something that had no right to exist. From above, I heard movement, a chair scraping lightly against the balcony floor, followed by footsteps. Patricia again. Of course. You are still on this, she asked, leaning slightly over the railing, her tone halfway between curiosity and annoyance. I did not stop recording. I did not even look up right away. It is not going away on its own, I said, keeping my focus on the phone screen as another drop hit the soil. She let out a small laugh, not loud, just enough to carry. It is a little water, Ethan. It rains, does it not? I finally looked up, meeting her eyes for a second before glancing back at the edge of the balcony. Rain falls straight down, I said. This does not. That seemed to land differently. Not like an argument. More like a correction. She shifted her weight slightly, resting one hand on the railing, her fingers tapping lightly against the wood. You are turning this into something it is not, she said. There is no damage. There is no violation. You are just uncomfortable with change. I almost smiled at that, not because it was funny, but because it was so familiar. The way people reframe a boundary issue into a personality issue. Make it about feelings instead of facts. I lowered my phone slowly, saving the video, and slipped it back into my pocket. This is not about change, I said. This is about where your structure ends and where my property begins. She shook her head slightly, like she had already decided how this would end. You are going to waste a lot of time chasing this, she replied. The HOA is not going to force a homeowner to tear down a completed improvement over a technicality. There it was again. That word. Technicality. Like measurements, boundaries, and legal definitions were just suggestions. I stepped back from the garden bed, brushing the dirt from my fingers, and looked up at the balcony one more time, then back at her. It is not a technicality, I said quietly. It is a line. For a second, neither of us said anything. The air felt still, heavier somehow, like even the wind had decided to stay out of it. Then she gave a small nod, more dismissive than agreeing, and picked up her coffee mug again. Conversation over, in her mind. I turned and walked back toward the house, but this time I did not feel that initial frustration from the morning. It had changed into something else, something clearer, because now I had more than just a feeling that something was wrong. I had evidence. I had measurements. I had a pattern starting to form, and patterns are what turn situations into cases. Inside, I set my phone on the counter, opened my laptop, and pulled up the county website. Not the HOA portal. Not the community guidelines. The actual building and zoning records. If this balcony was as approved as she believed it was, there would be permits, plans, filings, something official. And if there was not, then this was not just a disagreement between neighbors anymore. It was a violation that existed on paper, not just in the air above my yard. I typed in the property address slowly, deliberately, and hit search, already knowing that whatever came up next was going to decide how this played out. I hit search and watched the page load slower than it should have, like even the system needed a second to catch up with what I was about to find. Property records popped up first. Ownership details. Tax history. Nothing unusual. Then I clicked over to permits. That was where things started to get interesting. The list was short. Too short. A roofing permit from 3 years ago. A fence replacement filed by the previous owner. And that was it. No recent structural additions. No balcony. No extension. Nothing even close to what was now hanging over my yard like it had always been there. I leaned back slightly in the chair, letting the silence of the room settle around me. Outside, I could still hear faint movement from above, the soft scrape of furniture being adjusted on the new balcony, like she was already settling into something that did not legally exist. I refreshed the page once, just to be sure. Same result. No permit. No filing. No record. I reached for my phone and dialed the city building department, putting it on speaker and setting it down on the counter while the line rang. 2 rings. 3. Then a voice picked up, calm and professional. City Permitting Office, how can I help you? I straightened slightly, glancing at the screen again as if it might change. Yeah, hi. I am calling about a property on Willowbrook Drive, I said. There is a new second-story balcony that was just built, and I cannot find any permit on file. I wanted to confirm if one exists. There was a pause, the faint sound of typing on the other end. What is the address? She asked. I gave it to her, slow and clear. More typing. A longer pause this time. Then, I am not seeing any active or recently approved permits for that structure. I nodded to myself, even though she could not see it. So if something like that was built without a permit, I started. She finished the sentence for me, her tone still neutral but firmer. Then it would be considered unpermitted construction and subject to inspection and possible enforcement. I let that sit for a second, not rushing, not reacting, just letting the words land where they needed to. And what about setbacks or overhangs crossing property lines? I asked. Another pause, shorter this time. Any structural encroachment beyond property boundaries is a violation, she said. That includes overhangs, extensions, or anything that crosses into adjacent property space. I glanced toward the backyard door, the faint outline of that balcony visible through the glass even from where I sat today. Even if it does not touch the ground? I asked. If it crosses the vertical plane of the property line, it is still considered encroachment, she replied. Clear, direct, no room for interpretation. I exhaled slowly, feeling something shift again, but this time it was not frustration. It was confirmation. Okay, I said. Thank you. I ended the call and stood there for a moment, the phone still in my hand, the quiet of the kitchen now carrying a different weight. Outside, I heard Patricia laugh at something, light and carefree, like the day had gone exactly the way she expected it to. I walked to the back door and stepped out again, the evening air cooler now, the shadow from her balcony stretching longer across the yard as the sun dipped lower. She was sitting up there now, legs crossed, scrolling through her phone like nothing had changed, like nothing needed to. I rested my hand lightly on the top of the fence, looking up at the exact point where the structure crossed into my space. You ever pull a permit for that? I asked, keeping my voice even. She did not look up right away, just scrolled, then tapped her screen once before finally glancing over the edge. The HOA approved it, she said, like she had already answered that question earlier and did not understand why I was asking again. I nodded slightly. That is not what I asked. She let out a small sigh, setting her phone down beside her. Ethan, I am not going to go back and forth on this, she said. Everything was handled properly. I held her gaze for a second, then looked back at the edge of the balcony, then down at the fence line, tracing that invisible vertical boundary in my mind. No, I said quietly. It was not. That got her attention. She straightened slightly, her expression tightening just a bit. Excuse me. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my phone, and tapped the screen once, bringing up the call log. Not to show her, just to remind myself that this was not a guess anymore. I just spoke with the city, I said. There is no permit on file, and anything that crosses a property line, even in the air, is considered a violation. The silence that followed was different from before. Heavier. Not dismissive. Not amused. Just still. She looked at me, then at the edge of her balcony, then back at me again, like she was recalculating something she had not expected to have to think about. You are overreacting, she said finally, but it came out slower this time, less certain. I shook my head once. No, I said. I am documenting. And that was the moment the balance shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough for both of us to feel it. The next morning felt different before I even opened the door. No drill, no hammering, just silence. The kind that usually means something is waiting. I poured coffee, let it sit untouched on the counter, and picked up the folder instead. Survey, notes, photos, video timestamps. Everything from yesterday laid out in order, not emotional, not exaggerated, just facts. Clean, clear. That was the difference now. I was not reacting anymore. I was building a record. When I stepped outside, the air was cooler, the light sharper, And that balcony was still there, unchanged, like it had decided it was permanent. The shadow cut across the yard again, right over the chair my mom had already pulled into place. She was sitting there, wrapped in her sweater, hands around her mug, looking up at it with that same quiet confusion from yesterday. Not angry, not upset, just trying to make sense of something that did not belong in her routine. "It blocks the sun earlier now," she said softly, not even looking at me. I followed her gaze, tracking the line of light across the grass. She was right. By at least 30 minutes. Maybe more as the season shifted. "I will fix it," I said. Not loud, just certain. She nodded once, trusting it without asking how, and went back to her coffee. That trust hit harder than anything Patricia had said. I stepped back inside and sat down at the kitchen table, opening my laptop again. But this time I did not go to the permit page. I opened a blank document. Notice of encroachment. I typed it slowly, making sure every word meant exactly what it needed to mean. Property address. Description of structure. Measured overhang distance. Documentation of water runoff. Reference to city code regarding unpermitted construction and boundary violations. No accusations. No emotion. Just a clear statement of fact and a request for correction within a reasonable time frame. 10 days. That was enough to be fair, not enough to be ignored. I printed 2 copies, signed one, and slid it into an envelope. The paper felt heavier than it should have, like it carried more than just ink. When I stepped outside again, Patricia was already up there, standing at the railing with her phone in hand, scrolling like yesterday had not happened. I walked to her front door instead of the fence this time. Different approach. Same message. I knocked once, firm but not aggressive. A few seconds later, the door opened, and she stood there in the same controlled posture, like she had been expecting something but did not know what. "Morning," she said, her tone polite but guarded. I held up the envelope slightly. "This is for you," I said. She glanced at it, then back at me. "What is it?" I did not over-explain. "Written notice," I replied, "regarding the structure." She hesitated for half a second, then took it, her fingers brushing the edge like she was deciding how seriously to take it. "You are really doing this," she said, not quite a question. I met her eyes, steady. "I am handling it the right way." She gave a small exhale through her nose, somewhere between disbelief and annoyance, and opened the envelope right there in the doorway. Her eyes moved across the page quickly at first, then slower, then back up to the top again. The shift in her expression was subtle, but it was there. The confidence from yesterday was not gone, but it was not as solid either. 10 days, she said, looking up at me. "You expect me to remove a completed structure in 10 days. I shook my head slightly. "I expect you to address the violation," I said. "How you do that is your decision." That landed differently. Not an argument. Not a demand. A boundary. She folded the paper once, carefully this time, and held it in both hands. "The HOA is not going to support this," she said. "You are going to be wasting your time." I nodded once, already expecting that answer. "Then this will move beyond the HOA," I replied. No threat, just a statement. The kind that does not need to be explained. For a moment, we just stood there. No raised voices. No scene. Just 2 people on opposite sides of a line that had finally been made visible. She looked at the paper again, then back at me. "You could have just let this go," she said quietly. I glanced past her, toward the backyard where the shadow still cut across the space my mom was sitting in. "No," I said. I could not. And for the first time since this started, she did not have a quick response. Just silence. The kind that means something is finally being understood, even if it is not accepted yet. I turned and walked back down the path without waiting for anything else, the gravel crunching under my boots again, but this time it sounded different. Not heavier, not louder, just settled. Because once something is put in writing, it stops being a disagreement and starts becoming a timeline. And timelines do not care who thinks they are right. They only move forward. Day 3 was when the shift became visible. Not in the structure. The balcony was still there, clean lines, painted white, sitting exactly where it had been built like nothing had changed. But the way Patricia moved around it, that was different. I noticed it the moment I stepped outside that morning. She was not leaning casually on the railing anymore. She was pacing. Small movements, back and forth, phone in hand, stopping every few seconds to type something. Then look over the edge like she was checking angles she had not considered before. The confidence from earlier in the week had thinned out. Not gone. Just stretched. I did not say anything. I walked past the garden beds, checking the soil where the water had been dripping the night before. Still damp. Still uneven. I took another video. Same angle, same narration, consistent. Patterns matter more than moments. From above, her voice came down again, but this time it did not have that same polished edge. You filed something with the city? She asked. Not accusing. Not calm either. Just direct. I kept my focus on the ground for a second longer before looking up. I called, I said. I asked questions. She exhaled, sharper than before, and rested both hands on the railing. That was unnecessary, she said. We had a process already in place. I nodded once. The HOA process does not override city code. That landed harder than anything I had said before. She did not respond right away. Just looked at me, then away, then back again like she was trying to decide which version of this situation she still had control over. You are escalating this, she said finally. I shook my head slightly. No, I said. I am following procedure. That word hung there for a second. Procedure. Not opinion. Not preference. Something structured. Something that does not bend based on who is in charge of a neighborhood board. She pushed off the railing and disappeared from view without another word. The door upstairs slid shut with a soft click. I stood there for a moment, listening to the quiet settle again, then turned back toward the house. Inside, I opened my laptop and checked my email. There it was. A confirmation from the city. Case opened. Inspection request received. No timeline yet, but it was in the system now. Official. Trackable. That was all I needed. I printed the confirmation and added it to the folder right behind the notice I had given her. Everything in order. Everything building. Around mid-morning, there was a knock at my front door. Not loud. Not aggressive. Just 2 firm taps. I opened it to find Patricia standing there. No coffee this time. No relaxed posture. Just the envelope I had given her folded in her hand. We need to talk, she said. Not a request. Not quite a demand either. Just necessary. I stepped aside slightly, letting the door open wider, but I did not invite her in. We stood there on the threshold, that invisible line again, this time between the inside of my house and the outside. What is there to talk about? I asked. She held up the paper slightly. This, she said. You are asking for something that is not realistic. I kept my tone even. I am asking for a violation to be addressed. She shook her head, frustration starting to show now, not loud, but visible in the way her grip tightened on the envelope. It is built, she said. It is finished. You cannot just undo something like that because of a few feet of space. I glanced past her shoulder toward the backyard, where the edge of that balcony was just visible from the angle of the doorway. You built into space that was not yours, I said. That part is not complicated. She took a step closer, lowering her voice slightly like she was trying to bring this back into a quieter, more controlled place. Listen, she said. If this is about the water or the shade, we can work something out. Adjust drainage, maybe trim the extension slightly. There are solutions that do not involve all of this. I studied her for a second, the shift in strategy clear now. Not denial anymore. Negotiation. But still based on the assumption that the structure itself was staying. That part had not changed in her mind. This is not about finding a workaround, I said. It is about the boundary. She let out a slow breath, her shoulders dropping just a fraction. You are being rigid, she said. I shook my head once. No, I replied. I am being consistent. Another pause. Longer this time. The kind that stretches just enough for reality to start settling in. She looked down at the paper in her hand again, then back at me. You are really going to push this all the way? She said quietly. I did not hesitate. Yes, I said. And for the first time, there was no response at all. Just silence. Because at that point, there was nothing left to debate. The facts were already moving forward without either of us needing to say another word. The email came in at 9:18 a.m., and I knew what it was before I even opened it. Not because of the subject line, not because of the sender, but because of the timing. Systems like that do not move fast unless something is clearly wrong. I set my coffee down, still untouched, and clicked it open. Inspection scheduled. Same day. Between 11 a.m. and 1 p.m. I read it twice, not rushing, just confirming what I already understood. This was no longer theoretical. This was no longer a conversation between neighbors or a disagreement inside an HOA meeting room. This was official. I printed the email, added it to the folder, and closed it without any extra thought. Outside, the morning light was sharper, and that balcony cut through it the same way it had for the past few days, except now it did not feel permanent anymore. It felt temporary. Around 10:45, a white city truck pulled slowly onto the street, tires crunching against the curb as it stopped just short of Patricia's driveway. No sirens. No urgency. Just quiet authority. A man stepped out, clipboard in hand, wearing a light blue shirt with the city logo stitched over the pocket. He looked around once, taking in both properties in a single sweep, then walked toward the fence line. I stepped outside at the same time, not rushing, just present. He nodded once when he saw me. "You the one who filed?" he asked. "I am," I said. He glanced up at the structure above us, then back at the fence, then up again, already measuring it in his head before he even pulled out a tape. "All right," he said. "Let us take a look." He extended his measuring tool upward, the metal sliding out with a clean, precise sound, and lined it up exactly where I had days earlier. Same angle, same point, same result. He did not say anything at first, just wrote something down on the clipboard, then took a few photos from different positions. From above, I heard the sliding door open. Patricia stepped out, faster this time, her movements tighter, less controlled than before. "What is going on?" she called down, her voice carrying a sharp edge now. The inspector did not look up right away. He finished writing, then raised his head just enough to address her. "City inspection," he said. "We received a report of unpermitted construction and possible encroachment." She stepped closer to the railing, gripping it slightly. "This was approved," she said quickly. "The HOA signed off on it." He nodded once, not dismissive, just neutral. "HOA approval does not replace city permits," he replied. Simple. Final. No room for interpretation. She opened her mouth to respond, then paused, like she was searching for something that would carry the same weight. "It is not touching his property," she said instead, gesturing down toward my yard. The inspector glanced at the tape measure still extended, then back at her. "It crosses the vertical boundary," he said. "That is considered encroachment." He marked something else on the clipboard, then stepped back to take a wider photo, capturing both the structure and the fence line in the same frame. The click of the camera sounded louder than it should have. Final. Recorded. Patricia's posture shifted again, not defensive now, but unsettled. "So what does that mean?" she asked, and for the first time since this started, there was no control in her tone. "Just a question." The inspector flipped a page on his clipboard, scanning something quickly before answering. "It means this structure is non-compliant," he said. "No permit on file, and it extends beyond the allowable boundary. You will receive a formal notice." He paused for a second, then added, "You will also be required to bring it into compliance." That phrase hung there. Bring it into compliance. Not adjust. Not negotiate. Fix. She looked at him, then at the balcony beneath her feet, then out toward the yard where the shadow still stretched across the ground. "And if I do not?" she asked quietly. He met her gaze, calm and steady. "Then it moves to enforcement," he said. "No threat. Just process." He finished his notes, took one last photo, and retracted the tape measure with a smooth snap. "You will get everything in writing," he added, then nodded once to me before heading back toward the truck. The sound of his footsteps faded into the background, replaced by the quiet of the neighborhood again, but it felt different now. Heavier. Decided. I stood by the fence for a moment, looking up at the structure that had started this entire thing. Same wood, same paint, same position, but it did not feel the same anymore. Because now it was not just something that existed. It was something that had been defined. And once something gets defined by the right authority, it stops being a debate and starts becoming a deadline. The notice arrived 3 days later, folded clean and official in a white envelope with the city seal stamped in the corner. I did not rush to open it. I already knew what it said before I slid my finger under the edge and unfolded the paper. Non-compliant structure. Encroachment confirmed. Removal or modification required within 14 days to meet code. It was written in that same calm, neutral language the inspector had used, but on paper it carried more weight. It was no longer a conversation. It was a clock. Outside, I could hear movement again, but not the kind from before. No power tools. No construction noise. Just footsteps. Measured. Slower. I stepped out onto the patio and looked up. Patricia was standing there, not sitting, not relaxed, just holding the same paper in her hand, reading it again like the words might change if she looked long enough. For a moment, neither of us said anything. The balcony above me felt different now, not because it had moved, but because its future had. 14 days, she said finally, her voice quieter than I had heard it before. Not weak, just grounded. I nodded once. That is what it says. She looked down at me, then out across the yard, her eyes tracing the line where her structure crossed into my space, like she was seeing it clearly for the first time. Not as an extension, not as an improvement, as a boundary she had stepped over. I did not think it would go this far, she said. It was not an excuse. It was not defensive, just a statement. I leaned lightly against the fence, feeling the wood warm under my hand from the morning sun that had finally returned to that side of the yard. It did not have to, I said. She let out a slow breath, folding the notice carefully, more deliberate than before, like she understood now that paper like that does not disappear. The contractor said it was fine, she added. They said overhangs like that were common. I nodded slightly. Common does not mean permitted, I replied. She almost smiled at that, but it did not fully form. Just a small acknowledgement. For a few seconds, we stood there in the same quiet that had filled the space before, but it was different now. Not tense, not uncertain, just resolved. They are coming tomorrow, she said after a moment, to start taking it down. I looked up at the balcony again, the clean lines, the railings, the structure that had been so confidently placed just days ago. It still looked solid, finished, but now it had an end. Okay, I said. She nodded once, then turned and stepped back. Inside, the door sliding shut behind her with a soft, final sound. The next morning, the noise came back, but it was different. Not sharp, not invasive, controlled. The steady hum of tools working in reverse. Boards being removed instead of installed. Bolts loosened instead of tightened. I stood in the yard for a while, watching as the edge of the structure slowly pulled back, inch by inch, until it no longer crossed the line. The shadow shifted with it, retreating across the grass like it had been holding its place, and finally let go. By mid-afternoon, the extension was gone. The balcony still existed, but only where it was supposed to. Nothing more, nothing less. I walked over to the garden beds and crouched down, pressing my hand into the soil again. Dry, even. Sunlight hitting the leaves the way it had before any of this started. Behind me, I heard the back door open, and my mom stepped out, pausing for a second as she looked up at the sky above the yard. Clear, open, the way it should have been. It feels warmer today, she said, settling into her chair again, turning her face toward the light without thinking about it. I nodded, watching the sunlight settle back into its place across the grass, across the garden, across everything that had almost been taken for granted. Yeah, I said quietly. It does. And as I stood there, listening to the normal sounds of the neighborhood return, I realized something simple that most people overlook until it matters. Boundaries are not just lines on paper. They are the quiet agreements that let people live next to each other without stepping into each other's lives. And the moment you stop respecting those lines, even by a few feet, it stops being about space. It becomes about respect. Not loud, not dramatic, just necessary.